Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here to tell you a little bit about Airbnb, our global business, as well as our Asia-Pacific business. So let me just start by asking, how many of you have stayed at an Airbnb as a guest? Okay, that's pretty great. And how many of you have been a host on Airbnb? Okay, great, thank you. So let me tell you a little bit of a story, my own personal experience with Airbnb recently. I travel a lot for business, like I'm sure you can imagine, and I stay at Airbnbs wherever I go. And I often choose to stay with a host, because what I'm really looking for sometimes in the midst of all my business travel is to actually get a connection with the community, with the place I'm staying. And so most recently, I stayed with Mommy in Tokyo. I hadn't been to Japan for a couple years. I wanted to actually get a little bit more connected with what's happening, some of the demographic changes, also understand, what are the latest and greatest restaurants and all of that. And I had a really amazing local experience by staying with Mommy, meeting her parents actually, seeing her cat, and actually just having a very unique trip amidst my business travel while I was working with my team and obviously getting business goals accomplished. And so that's a little bit at the heart, but let me tell you a little bit about how Airbnb got started. Here are our founders, Nate, Joe, and Brian, and they're sitting in a conference room at Airbnb called Rausch Street. And it's a replica of the first Airbnb apartment. This is where the first Airbnb trip happened. It happened when Brian was moving up to San Francisco to live with Joe. And lo and behold, right after he moved up, the rent increased, their landlord increased the rent, and they didn't actually have enough money to pay the rent. And they're kind of trying to figure out, what do we do? And at that time, a couple of weekends away, there was a design conference coming into town. And being RISD designers, former RISD alumni, they said, you know what? They noticed that all the hotel rooms had been booked up. And they said, let's have people stay with us. We can charge them some money, and we can both meet some people as well as actually get our rent paid. These are some of their first guests, Kat, Michael, and actually an APAC native, an Indian native, Amol. And what ended up happening over the course of the weekend was pretty interesting. So they spent a couple of days with their guests. They took them to the conference. They ended up spending a lot of time. And after the weekend, they did make that $1,100 that they needed to spend, that they needed for the rent. But more importantly, and the key insight for them, was they actually walked away with 3 new friends, and actually were invited to Amol's wedding several years later. And I think that was what spurred them from understanding the fact that, they had had this unique insight, this unique experience, and if they had had it, there must be millions of other people around the world that would want to have a similar type of experience. It's the combination of income plus community that actually was the core to Airbnb. And this is actually the first website that was put up in order to attract their first guests. And now, 8 years later, this is a photo of our headquarters in San Francisco, a renovated old battery factory, and with global offices around the world. So how does Airbnb work? Airbnb is an online platform that lets you book unique homes from local hosts so that you can have authentic experiences wherever you travel around the world. We're on all 3 platforms, as you can imagine, is very important, especially here in APAC. So whether you're looking to, book an apartment for a night, a castle for a week, or a villa for a month, Airbnb connects people to unique travel experiences, and that's at the heart of it. And we are a global community. And we're really excited to be part of this growing sharing economy, where companies are using the power of sharing to reshape industries fundamentally. So what exactly is a sharing economy company? It's a digital platform that connects supply and demand. No longer is ownership a requirement in order to have access to services. It's often online to offline, which in our case is certainly true. And as others talked about earlier, trust is a fundamental component. It's what makes the sharing economy work. And Airbnb is built on trust. And we've built that trust over 8 years in a number of different ways. The first is really around reviews. Guests and hosts can leave reviews for each other after every trip, and those reviews, we've worked very hard to make sure they're always authentic reviews. The second is around verified ID profiles, so that we have government IDs for users when they travel. Secure payment system to make sure payments are getting paid when transactions are actually happening. 24-hour customer support across the world in 14 different languages. And we have a property guarantee for hosts in case they have any damage to their homes. So let's talk a little bit about our growth. So we really started off as a North America company, but very quickly have grown around the world. So that today, we have a total of over 2 million homes in 34,000 cities in 191 countries around the world. And over 70 million people to date have stayed on an Airbnb. APAC is our fastest growing region, with 380% outbound growth and about 390% inbound growth. And yet, we still have a long way to go. We're pretty underrepresented in APAC still. 21% of the total accommodations market today is from the APAC region, the Asia region actually. And by 2020, that's going to be about 31%. And so we want to be a part of that growth. And so we've been investing in building teams, building our presence here in APAC since 2013. And as we've grown, we've seen some really amazing benefits of home sharing. What we've seen is, one, guests stay longer and spend more. So Airbnb guests stay nearly twice as long as the typical tourist, and they actually spend 30% more than the typical tourist in their neighborhoods. They're creating supplemental income for hosts. So 47% of our hosts actually make ends meet by their hosting. So this is really important income for folks. It's as much as 14% on average for our North America hosts. And what's really interesting about Airbnb is that the vast majority of Airbnb listings are actually outside the normal tourism and hotel districts. And so we're actually distributing tourism and bringing visitors to neighborhoods that normally wouldn't get those visitors. And with them, they are bringing all of their spending and the economic development that comes with that. We're actually revitalizing a lot of communities. Another exciting benefit is really around the surge capacity that we can bring. This is one of the things that we are most proud of. Events like the World Cup, where 1 in 5 international visitors in Brazil stayed on Airbnb. We've partnered up with the Olympics as well in Rio, and we've had a number of examples of these types of events where, capacity like this is incredibly difficult to build, as I'm sure all of you know. And so the ability to bring homes onto the platform quickly and also create income for hosts when we do that is a really exciting opportunity. And last is disaster relief. This isn't something that many of you may think of, but one of the things we've noticed about the Airbnb community is just how very generous they are. And so when we've had disaster strike, Sandy was a perfect example, where we had 1,200 Airbnb hosts volunteer and offer to open up their homes for little to no charge, to offer to allow people to stay with them in a time of need. And we've seen this now replicated in many, many crises around the world. And it just shows how generous people can be and want to be if you just give them a platform to do so. So a little bit about Airbnb in Asia Pacific. We see Airbnb offering the same types of benefits globally, bringing that to the APAC region, increased tourism, helping out the local economy, and bringing guests and hosts closer together. To date, we have about 300,000 listings in the APAC region, and our listings are growing at about 2.5x year on year. We have about 12 million users in the region. So a couple of interesting ways we see users here, things happening in the region. So about 35% of the trips are actually from people coming from other parts of the world. So they're actually experiencing APAC in a really unique way. They're actually staying with locals, they're going to different neighborhoods, and they're getting a much more authentic view of the Asia-Pacific region than what they've been able to do historically. The other piece is you can see there's a lot of intra-regional travel happening for us in Airbnb, and it just shows that APAC, as you all know, 4 out of 5 trips from APAC that start in APAC end in APAC, and people are very willing to do this on Airbnb and embracing the sharing economy here, just like they have done in North America and in Europe. So some key markets that you might find interesting. So China is our fastest growing outbound market in the world at over 300% year on year. Japan is our fastest growing inbound market in the world at over 350% year on year. Everybody loves to go to Japan. And we see over the long term, Southeast Asia and South Asia being critical markets for us. So we have over 100,000 listings in Southeast Asia, and last year alone we had over 150,000 trips by Indian guests. So the same reasons that Airbnb is good globally, we're having the same impact here at APAC. So what's next? What we think is really interesting about the APAC region is that it's a true source of innovation for us. And I think that is an opportunity as a global company for us to really take advantage of. And a lot of that innovation is driven by mobile adoption here. So as you know, smartphones are getting cheaper, are already cheap, driven by companies like Xiaomi, Micromask, the list goes on. That's surely giving a lot of people access to our product and many of your products. Social apps are really driving communications and allowing us to communicate and get in touch with people in a whole new way. We also see an interesting trend around content and commerce merging. I think this is somebody who's based in the US and spent most of my life in the US, I think we've really struggled with. And yet we're seeing lots of examples of companies doing this very well in the APAC region that we want to learn from. So for us, mobile is a huge emphasis. We see over, a majority of our signups on Airbnb are happening through our mobile device, our mobile app. About 33% of our Asian bookings are being made on mobile. And actually our Asian users are interacting one way or another with the mobile device for 75% of their bookings. So all of you, I'm sure, know how important WeChat is. And so one of the things that for us has been important is to really embrace WeChat and really get to know and understand it. So we recently integrated with WeChat as a sign-in option. As a part of our overall strategy in APAC, localization has been key. And so the sign-in option has been important for us. And once we've done that, we're starting to see really unique opportunities to connect and engage with folks through the WeChat platform. And this is an example of a social quiz that we've done, that we've gotten over 1 million participants in a very short amount of time. So the ability to search and book anytime, anywhere is the leading motivation and preference for our mobile bookers. That's what people tell us. And so we have continued focus on mobile innovation and then trying to also tap into discovery and inspiration and engagement using content and merging that with commerce. So I'll leave you just with the comment that we are really, really excited about the way users, guests, and hosts have embraced the sharing economy quicker than in other markets, honestly. And for us, in Airbnb in particular, we see fantastic growth and engagement with what we're doing. And we're just really honored to be able to provide these kind of services in the region. Thank you.
Okay, let's bring our talkbackers to the stage. First, Ms. Nina Kubik-Cheng, Vice President, Partnerships, Roomorama. And Clement Wong, CEO and founder, BeMyGuest.
Hi, Varsha. Obviously, India is an important market, so is China, Korea. You're taking on a lot of markets in Asia Pacific at the same time. I was wondering, is there a key focus that you have? What is your Asia strategy? What are the milestones you have taken? And what are the milestones that are ahead in the next 12 months that you are looking to take here in Asia Pacific?
There's a lot of questions.
Yes.
I'll take it step by step. So I think the first thing I would say is, we recognize that Asia Pacific would be a critical market for us several years ago. So we've been investing in the regions for over three or four years now. And we really started off with doing research and trying to get to know our customers. The same kind of approach, frankly, that the founders used back in the day when they were trying to understand what really made Airbnb tick. And they have had the advice, the sage advice, to say, it's better for 100, really get to know your users and your customers, because it's better to have 100 users who love you than 1,000 users that kind of like you. And so using that same philosophy, we came here into the region and we really got to know our guests and our hosts to understand why do they like Airbnb. And what was incredibly inspiring was to hear that it was actually the same reasons. The same reasons why Airbnb was being adopted and loved in places like Paris and Copenhagen and New York and Amsterdam, all over the Europe and North America markets. Asians were adopting us for the same reasons. And so that core fundamental desire to connect with people, to have local authentic experiences, is what grounds us as a company, and it's what we're continued to be focused on. As I say that, though, we do recognize that Asia has differences. And so we've been very focused on trying to localize and be relevant and reach people in a relevant way. So I'd say there's a couple of main things. We've been focused on product, first of all. Second is around building awareness. And third is around, of course, making sure we have a strong host community. So when I talk about product, we've taken steps to really localize. So, very beginning, our China approach has really been focused on outbound travelers. And Facebook is not available in China. So very quickly we realized that you can't have a sign-in option for Facebook. It would be completely irrelevant. So we've had to change all of our sign-in options to work. Take off Facebook, put in Weibo, put in WeChat, and actually we have just launched phone number sign-in. So these are all modifications that we've made with the Asian consumer in mind. Second is really around local relevance, especially for marketing. To really tap into the hearts and minds of Asian travelers, people need to see that Airbnb is for them, and it can be for them. Because our product, while we are seeing great interest and adoption, it is not a product that, is a product that does take education. People need to understand what Airbnb really is. And so finding a way to communicate why Airbnb is a great option for people is something that we're continually looking at and localizing our marketing, our messaging, and whatnot. And then the core of Airbnb is really our hosts and our community. And so making sure that we have great hosts from all the areas that our Asian consumers want to go to, it has been really, really a big focus for us. And that has actually been a focus beyond, you think about the big markets like China really being an outbound market, all of Southeast Asia, Australia, all of even Northeast Asia, Tokyo, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all those markets are really, really important from a host community standpoint. So,
thank you.
I think one thing about Airbnb, from what you have been saying as well, it's all about the brand promise of local hosts taking you around and so on, right? But to be very honest, there was an article in the Financial Times last week that it says that Airbnb has lost its soul, in the sense that rather than local hosts welcoming you to their home, it's just a property manager, right? So right now, rather than the purpose of aggregating and going direct, now there's this intermediation. So you have property managers trying to optimize the yield for the properties in itself. So, to be honest, the last few properties I stayed at Airbnb, it was just a property manager. Hey, here are the things, and here you go. So what do you think about that?
So the vast majority of the properties on Airbnb are what we call permanent homes. And we are very, very committed to making sure that Airbnb is about having local, authentic experiences that relate to people and being able to stay in real people's homes. And so, we've shared this data out. And so sometimes in a vacation spot, the homeowner may not live there and they may need somebody to help take care of their property. But our core is really focusing on people's own homes, their permanent homes, so you can see the personality of who they are when you go there.
So in terms of supply as well, right? So in India, there are restrictions in terms of the housing societies. In Singapore, 87% of housing is all government owned, so it's illegal to rent it out. So how would you address this issue of supply? And secondly, would you be like Uber, going out to buy its own cars?
So, again, we are very focused in terms of working. We want to be a positive force and really work in collaboration with communities. And so we have a compact that says, a couple things. One, we tailor, we know that every community is different. What works in Bali is going to be different than what works in Tokyo, than what works in, Singapore. And so our desire is to actually have a tailored approach for hosts and what is allowed based on what is right for that market. And so we have worked really carefully about creating those relationships and having those conversations. We also want to be transparent about what we're doing. It's sort of transparency is our second main pillar of our compact. Being transparent about who is on the platform from an aggregated standpoint, so really communities and cities understand what is actually happening in their vicinity is our second main commitment. And then the third is that we're really committed to affordable housing. So, we want to make sure that, again, we're a positive force for the environment and the community and not a negative one. And so in those communities where affordable housing is an issue, we are willing to and we want to make the right commitments and limits on what Airbnb will do. And so that's where, limiting to permanent homes and whatnot has been very important.
Varsha, we have a question from the floor.
Okay.
Hi, Varsha. I'm Pariket, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Audio Compass. My question, actually, I understand the value of Airbnb, in a cost-conscious market like India, and I'm going to talk about India specifically. But from a cultural perspective, there are challenges of trust and security, right? Especially in a country, for a billion people, from a culture that we come from. So what are you guys doing to kind of overcome that here?
So I think I talked, it's a great point, and I talked a little bit about how we approach trust, and I think it's really important to emphasize probably a couple things. One, as we said, reviews are really, really important as a foundation for what we do at Airbnb. The second, which I actually didn't mention, but I think it's hopefully understood, real identities are a critical component of Airbnb. So we don't allow any pseudonyms or any of that, and that's actually helped and supported by the fact that we have verified ID profiles. The third is really around 24/7 customer support. In addition to that, we have hundreds of folks who are working in our trust and safety team to make sure that the people on the platform are actually good people and we have a positive community. And then last is really around making sure that when things might happen from a property damage perspective or anything like that, our hosts are protected. Thank you.
So shifting gears a bit, right? So Airbnb announced recently in the last quarter that it's now launching on a beta test stage in the US on the local experiences. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
So I think what we believe and understand is that when people actually are traveling, what they really want is to have an experience. It's similar to what the last panelists were talking about. And so, today, we do offer great homes that offer an element of an experience. But what we find is that, as we've seen from a lot of stories from our hosts and our guests, is some of the richest trips that people have taken are because they've had great experiences with their hosts. And so we really just want to be able to foster and extend that. And so that's what some of the things that we're doing right now are in beta.
Varsha, I'd just like to ask a question from the floor.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting, around the discussion of Airbnb, trust and safety come up quite a bit. But actually, in our research, what we see is when people don't rent a home, the number one reason is actually because it's not a hotel. So it doesn't have all the conveniences, the amenities, the 24-hour check-in, the on-site F&B, concierge, the gym. So how are you thinking about that gap and trying to get the other 75, 80% of travelers around the world that haven't rented a home to start thinking about, oh, I can have this kind of experience, maybe address some of those points of friction around the hotel conveniences that currently are not a part of the Airbnb experience?
It's a great point, and I think the best hosts, to be honest, do a lot of those things to actually bridge that gap. So you get this combination of a unique environment plus, somebody who will personally check you in and somebody who's there who's, stocked your fridge at least with the basics. And so, we have 9 hospitality guidelines that have been there to kind of serve as a foundation. But I think we need to do, and we can do, a lot more to actually train our hosts, educate our hosts on kind of what are the higher levels of hospitality that can be offered that our guests would really appreciate.
But it is it's something that's kind of distributed among your hosts. It's not something that Airbnb might step in at some point. And you have toyed with the idea of like a virtual concierge in the past or things like that.
I think the power of Airbnb is really the community, and what allows us to do things at scale. So fundamentally, when we think about problems like this, we're always looking to how do we solve them at scale, and often our community is at the center of that. So, that's really how we'd like to approach the problem and provide tools and support so that our hosts can offer those services.
Great, thank you.
Varsha, the success of Airbnb certainly has given validation to the non-hotel accommodation. So with that, you are no longer the only provider or the only platform. When you're going into some of the Asian markets, you find very strong local companies, and international companies haven't quite made it. What makes you confident that you will be able to, enter this market and at greater scale, succeed?
Our real focus is really staying committed to our mission. And our mission of creating unique local travel experiences, creating a world where you can belong anywhere, and having the community be the center of what we do is how we think about growth in all markets. And so that does mean that, there'll be some sectors of the market that we probably wouldn't want to have on our platform because they're not community oriented and they don't provide those local authentic experiences. Our goal is, what we have found is that when we stay true to the mission and we're staying very focused, that's when people are having authentic experiences. And great experiences, then they're coming back, they're telling their friends, and that's driving organic growth in a way that, if you're just kind of going after every supply category and trying to aggregate everything, it's really hard to stay true to what's core to you. So that is, the center pillar of our strategy, and that's how we're approaching Asia Pacific as well. And I think we're really inspired by the fact that the consumer here does seem to want that experience, and they're kind of voting with their trips.
Varsha, we have one more question from the floor.
Hi, Varsha. This is Vishnu representing Holiday IQ. My question is basically that India is a late starter for alternative accommodation build-up. So in that kind of market where basically business and urban and versus basically leisure destinations are even more complicated matters basically to build the capacity, how you see and what kind of problems basically or challenges Airbnb is facing in building that capacity in a leisure destinations?
So recruiting hosts, is an education process, is what I would say. And from the show of hands in the beginning, you can see that, it's many of you are guests, but a much, 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 much smaller percentage of you are hosts. And so, what we have found, we have a couple of, things that we've seen have worked. So first of all, we see a really nice network effect. When guests actually take great trips, some of them come back and they say, I want to do this and I want to be a host. And so that is actually a really exciting and compelling way and a very scalable way that we grow our host community. But we also actually go into communities and actually recruit hosts and share the benefits of why people might want to become a host, and we seed markets. But it's a lot of education, it's a lot of sharing of host stories. What we find, as you might imagine, is that the best way that hosts feel confident about hosting is hearing it from other hosts. It's better to have other people share your stories than you sharing it. And so that's also where, host word of mouth has been really critical for us. So we're very committed to also making sure we support our hosts, that they can have the support they need to be successful hosts.
Ladies and gentlemen, Varsha Rao, Nina Kubik-Cheng, and Clement Wong.